Welcome to the AI Lyceum, where we explore how AI is reshaping the world across multiple industries, from creativity to ethics to economics and society. In this episode, we turn to the world of advertising, an industry that has both defined and been disrupted by tech. And our guest is none other than Brian O'Kelly, who's the entrepreneur, engineer, innovator, and inventor, really, of the ad exchange. And he's sold two businesses. He's a former CTO of Right Media and former founder and CEO of AppNexus, which was acquired by AT&T for $1.6 billion in 2018. And now he's focused on Scope3, which is focused on agentic media, but also the future of the sustainability of advertising and the future of the agentic ecosystem and optimizing the carbon output of the digital supply chain. He mentions he's not motivated by money, he's motivated by impact, which resonates with me. He spent decades building the infrastructure that powers the open internet. And we're going to discuss agentic systems, LLMs, the future of advertising, the ethical side of advertising, keeping humans in the loop. But also, we've had a few brief exchanges this year about the future of the industry, but I've not yet had his time to talk in an hour or so in detail. So thank you for joining, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So to kick off, I want to kind of go back 10 or 20 years into what got you into advertising in the first place.
Well, in 1999, I did a .com startup that failed, and I got fired. And one of my mentors, this is right after college. The day after graduation, I flew to LA. I was the CEO of a 30-person company. It was crazy. And 6 weeks later, I was unemployed. And so one of my mentors called me up and said, "Come work for me, and I'll teach you everything I've learned in a decade at Anderson Consulting, which is now Accenture." And so I moved to Hoboken, New Jersey, and was a consultant for this little consulting firm that specialized in real-time personalization. And one of my first clients was American Express. And the challenge was, this is right when websites were just starting for big companies. When you logged into Amex, could they show you content that was personalized? And content might be an offer, maybe to go on a cruise or to change to a new credit card. And using a real-time prediction system, we were able to double the response rate of their internal content, which I found out later generated about $1 billion of incremental profit for Amex over the next 7 or 8 years. And it was just kind of amazing to think that just by, building these prediction systems, you could change people's behavior and make tons of money. And at the same time, there was a company called DoubleClick that was putting ad tags on their site. And I was like, well, what's the difference? Like, if you log in, we have this incredibly rich data. But then you have this other company on the sort of public website that's basically dumb. And so I said, what if we could do all this incredible personalization for an ad tag? Like, what's the difference between personalizing an offer and an ad? And so we signed, my boss was like, great idea. And we signed a client, which was for real, astrology.net, to convince them that we could predict, using all this tech based on click streams, whether or not someone would be interested in signing up for like the premium package. So if you're a Leo clicking on like the love horoscope, which package should we show you? And so I was out in Silicon Valley working with this partner of ours, and I had a server, like a computer on my desk. And so I was serving ads. My first ever ad server was a physical computer on my desk that was responding to and tracking the click stream from astrology.net and trying to predict whether we should send you the love forecast upgrade package or the business package or the career package or what. And short story long, it didn't work. Like, there wasn't that much predictive data there. Like, compared to Amex, it was night and day. But I was really hooked on this idea of, what if we could use prediction, like real-time prediction, as a way to, make the internet dynamic. I mean, if you think back to Yahoo in the 90s, it was literally just a static directory of links. There was nothing dynamic about it. We barely had e-commerce. And so the idea that we could make the internet change for every single person It's just a massive scale because it was just going kind of like AI now. It was just going vertical. Was amazing. The other thing was, as a computer scientist who specialized in distributed systems, there were very few people with the technical chops to build systems that could scale to the internet. It was growing so fast. And so it was just one of those things where my passion and a lot of random circumstances and then my academic capabilities just all came together. And I was an entrepreneur. I've been starting companies since I was in high school, and just you couldn't be in a better position to graduate college in 1999 when the internet's about to pop, or it's popped, and the world's scaling like crazy, and you're a distributed systems person, and then to have some of my formative work experiences be in real-time prediction systems. I mean, it's kind of like a recipe. Like if you're going to have a petri dish to make me, like, there it is.
I like the petri dish analogy. And 1999 was the year before YouTube came out, right? I think so.
It might be, but if it did, YouTube didn't have any users in 2000 because the internet was too slow. Like nobody had broadband. So there's a bunch of like V1 video streaming companies, but it wasn't for probably 5 or 6 years, I think, until Google bought them and it began to become a real like thing.
Wow. And like you talk about distributed systems, what sort of modeling techniques did you use to figure out the best scrapes to serve to the right person?
Well, back then, I mean, think about how slow computers were. I mean, they're 1,000 times faster now. I mean, the idea of serving 10,000 requests a second on a server was almost impossible. Like I had to hack the kernel, like literally hack the kernel. I was submitting kernel patches to Linux 2.6 to make it even work. Um, in terms of like, how much compute you had, like how much you could do in real time, it was very limited. And so the first system I built at Right Media in 2003 or 4 was a Bayesian predictor, meaning that we would do, 8 or 10 fairly simple multiplication and division operations in real time. And we stored a lot of the data set in cookies because it was actually faster to send it back and forth over the wire versus trying to have some kind of servers to store it all. Um, and then, of course, it got smarter from there. But even the next step was something like, I think it was decision trees or random forests, because they're very quick to execute in real time, where you have only a small number of computations to make, because otherwise it wouldn't run.
Yeah, I've used random forest with my team previously at WPP to basically predict which metrics are the best metrics to predict attention with and that sort of thing. In the last 10 or 20 years, what have been some of the most pivotal moments in your career and in advertising that's shaped the way that you think today?
Wow. The most pivotal moments over 20 years. Um, I mean, I think selling Right Media to Yahoo, which was the result of the first ad exchange kind of failing and then working and figuring all that. I mean, that's a whole chapter, right? Like the moment the ad exchange worked, selling it to Yahoo commercially and then having them buy the company, getting fired again, inventing header bidding, real time bidding. I mean, my first SPO blog post that I thought was going to change the world and didn't, inventing curation. I don't know. I mean, there's so many moments along the way. Uh, Selling to AT&T, of course. I don't know. I think for me, there's just so many like stories embedded in all of that. But really, I think about is all the people that I've had the good fortune to get to know and work with and learn from, and almost this diaspora of like just imagine the day in like April 2005, April 1st, when we launched the Right Media Ad Exchange. There were probably 50 people in the world who knew what an ad exchange was. And of those, probably half had no idea what it really did. And then a year later, there were probably 5,000, And then a year later, it was 25,000. Because remember, Google was copying. And all of a sudden, it was 100,000. An ad exchanger launched. And now it's millions. Like, people write academic articles about it. And it's all falling apart. It's all going to go away. Like, we've hit the peak and we're going down. Like, isn't that crazy? To imagine that, you can have an idea that millions of people like think is the way things work. So I don't know, like, what was the most important moment? Was it flying to Israel with Elad Ephraim to pitch Iridian on being the very first user of the ad exchange and them saying yes? Like, was that the most important moment of the whole thing? Was finding somebody who believed in me and this idea enough to try it? Like, that might actually be, if you really go back and say, when the world changed, or maybe it was when Andy Atherton and Ryan Christensen said yes to me at Andy's kitchen table to use Right Media at Yahoo, or the day I flew out to Microsoft and Dave O'Hara and Eric Boyd and Aaron Easterly and Jeff Green decided to use AppNexus at Microsoft. I mean, these are the moments as an entrepreneur that you never forget. Like, I will never forget those moments because those people believed in me enough to say yes. And so that's why if you're, in the ad tech world and you see some of these names reoccur, it's because there's a bunch of people who've over the years been so deeply invested in the future of the industry. It's really special.
Yeah, I think entrepreneurship and what you've done is very inspiring for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people want to try and follow in your footsteps and hopefully build on your shoulders. I think I want to understand before we move on to Agentic and Ad Context Protocol, what are the things you've learned about yourself the most through the failures that you've experienced in your career so far? Or maybe instead of failures, maybe learnings, you might call it.
I think failures is fair. I mean, I think one thing that's pretty clear is that but a lot of the things that seem obvious to me aren't always obvious to other people. That's a very clear thing. And also, it doesn't matter if you're right if you can't get other people to go along with something. And so there's this really interesting tension. Like, I think I could probably convince almost anybody of almost anything, but it doesn't necessarily stick, right? Like, it's not like if we're in a meeting and you say yes, and then you go think about it, and then you're like, actually, that's a terrible thing, I'm not doing. Or you go to talk to your colleagues. Like, it's really interesting to watch like how ideas either spread or don't. And how does it go from like me telling you something, you're like, oh my gosh, not only is it a great idea, I'm going to go convince other people. So one of the failures is like not recognizing the difference between convincing somebody and it actually being like compelling in a very deep way. So I don't know. I think a lot of my failures as a leader have been not finding the right balance between the moments when I need to tell people what to do and moments when I need to convince people and moments when I need to listen. And I think finding those balances, because there's always some of each, it's actually very, very hard sometimes to find that balance and not to get arrogant and think you're perfect, but also not to be so timid that you don't make decisions or you don't stand up for stuff. So I don't know. I mean, that's something I still think a lot about is for all of us, whether you're the president of a country or you're, working by yourself in your basement, like how do we lead? How do we collaborate? How do we have conviction and humility at the same time? How do you surround yourself with people that you can trust and that can trust you, where you have real dialogue, but we're not stuck in being so collaborative, nothing ever happens. I mean, all of this is just, I don't know. I think whenever I retire, I'm gonna look back and be like, man, I never quite got that right.
And I know that your wife is a psychologist, and has she taught you anything about how to be a better leader?
Oh man. I mean, she's definitely taught me a lot about a lot of things. I mean, certainly have a lot more respect for the human aspect of kind of everything. Like everybody's dealing with stuff. Everybody has their own, call it intrinsic motivations, and not everybody is able to spend the time or effort to really get to know themselves and have an honest dialogue about themselves. And that could be with a therapist, that could be with a friend, that could be something you do on a meditation retreat. But I just, it's like, it's just giving me a lot more, even vocabulary for what it means to talk about people. And I'm an engineer, right? Like I don't inherently think, I'm wearing it's too peoply outside, sure. Like I would not say my happiest place is, people. Um, but then again, it's the most important thing I do every day is interact with people. So yeah, I mean, it's been challenging and important to have a psychologist as a wife. I'll say that.
That's really good. They say opposites attract, so it's probably a good thing you have a wife who's a psychologist.
She's always very interested. Like, I mean, what a great person to have in your life if you're a psychologist. Like constantly, you know.
She's got a lifelong study going on with you.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think let me have a look at the different questions here. I think let's move on to AI now. So obviously you're interested in computer science and AI as well as humans now. What was your wow moment in AI? And you've worked for a long time. Was it most recently or was it back in the day?
And when I went to university, I wanted to study AI. Like, I thought that was the most important thing to do. And they laughed at me and said, this is a dead field. It was so hot in the 80s, but now there's nothing going on. There's no research. It's a dead end. And I regret that. And actually, I'm sort of annoyed because one of my classmates is Fei Li, who is one of the most renowned AI researchers in the world. How are we both computer scientists at the same place and she got to do it? Or maybe she just, I don't know, but it's very frustrating. So I've always just been fascinated by this sort of, we didn't even call it data science, but this machine learning, this idea that we could use computers to predict and understand things. I think the incredible evolution through the 2010 to 2020, that decade, the teens, of data science from being kind of a niche. Like I remember reading academic papers to try to do stuff in 99. Like there was nothing out there, to it being a mainstream thing you could study in school, was amazing. And I also think that I've been very skeptical of people talking about AI for a long time. And about a year ago, maybe, September last year, it hit the threshold for me where it was so good I could use it for work tasks. And it's 10 times better now, but just saying what is this web page about? What ad should be on this web page? Is this web page brand safe for an advertiser who cares about whatever? I was like, actually, this is possibly better than the state of the art out of the box. This is a generic reasoning engine that can do things that would take an immense amount of work. And that's one reason that Scope3 launched a brand safety and suitability platform, because I was like, well, this is a feature. This is no longer a product. This is going to be easy. And I was just fascinated by the idea that so much of what we think of as hard problems in ad tech were going to become easy. And the second you realize that, you start looking around at all these technologies and all these platforms, you're like, well, AI is going to eat this. And, maybe it's like cloud computing, 15 years ago, where it's like, oh, Like I used to rack and stack servers. I used to physically have to go to a place with a physical server. I'm never going to do that again, And I think AI is doing that where, how many hours have I written code and painstakingly read every line of code and I may never touch code again, even though I'm generating gazillions of lines of code because I can do it through AI. And so that series of revelations, I think, on a product level a year ago, from a coding perspective, it was in May that I started doing vibe coding. And then maybe in August, there's a product called Conductor that lets you vibe code in multiple places at once. And I was just like, whoa, hang on. Like, I am superhuman. I am actually a superhuman developer. And people made fun of me on LinkedIn because they're like, oh, Brian just vibe code. I'm like, this LinkedIn message is not going to age well. Like when you're complaining that I'm vibe coding and you're writing real software, just wait. And I think I've come out on the good side of that. The hard part is so many people run businesses that depend on not getting made obsolete, right? Like if you're just using Double Verify or IIS as an example, like effectively their only claim to fame is going to be that they have a lot of locked in clients and maybe some integrations that are hard to do. But how long is that really valuable? How long does that last? And what does it mean if, what's that, a $1 billion revenue, $1.5 billion revenue sector? It's probably going to go to like 100. Ouch. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's not my goal. My goal is not to destroy value, but the reality is that value is destroyed whether you like it or not. The question is just how long can you cling to the past and who's going to think about the future? And that's not just advertising. That's every industry, I think, is going through that reckoning.
Yeah, I think the infrastructure of the internet is going to ultimately shift. I don't think we're going to have, at the top of this, I can see meet.google.com. I don't think that's going to be there in a couple of years. I think there's going to be some sort of radical shift. You mentioned brand safety. I see brand safety as a way of pushing content to a certain place. What if it's pull? What if I'm searching for, hey, ChatGPT, I'm looking for the best t-shirt to wear to the gym, size extra large, has to be black, and it gives me answers from brands. How do we look at brand safety when it's a pull strategy or an organic response from these LLMs?
Well, brand safety is inherently about advertising, meaning if it's organic, I don't think the brand can control it, right? They can't stop, an avatar from saying, something scandalous and then saying L'Oreal, or mac and cheese. Like you can fill in the blanks of the scandalous statement about mac and cheese, right? Like that's not their problem. But if they then run an ad, that then you'd say, okay, well, wait a second. Like I don't want to pay money to have my brand there. Although you might sell a lot of product depending on what the actual scandalous content was. I'm just saying. So that's the tension, I think. And the question all the AI companies are confronting is, I think they've all agreed they're not going to bias responses for advertising. Like they're not going to say if United pays more money, they'll recommend United flights instead of Delta. And we've seen Perplexity try totally unrelated ads where it's just randomly on the page. And that didn't work. Advertisers don't want it. Consumers don't care. So we haven't quite figured this out yet. But when we do, there's going to be a massive brand safety and suitability conversation of, how much control do advertisers want and need? Are there, if it's truly a user generated conversation, like if you were my AI boyfriend and we're having a conversation, I've obviously accepted the content. It's not like you can't be like scandalized that you're having a conversation, right? But it doesn't mean the brand necessarily wants to be in that conversation. So it's going to be really fascinating. It's also going to be hard because if all content is dynamic, you can't like say this URL is brand safe. It's all going to be live and completely contextual to the moment it's in. And these technologies weren't built for that, at least the legacy ones. I don't think brands are really there yet. I don't think they've gotten their heads around this. But if I have an AI avatar to read me a podcast, right? And that podcast is a conversation, not, static content, advertising is going to be different. It's just going to inherently be different.
And how do you think agents are going to change our industry and our landscape?
Well, I mean, I think there's a few use cases for that, but the one I think is really fascinating is, the complexity of running an ad campaign is extremely high in most cases. Like if you go try to use Google Ads to do anything, it is a daunting, overwhelming experience, which is why Google came out with PMax and basically said, look, giving people all this control and all these levers, maybe there's a subset of folks who know exactly which levers to press, but the vast majority of people aren't going to do it right. Why don't we just have AI figure it out for them? And in fact, even creative, like, a lot of small businesses have to hire local agencies. They charge a ton of money. They're not very good. Meta's like, you know what? We got this. Like, we can just make awesome creative for your business. And it's an interesting simplification of the process. And so if you think about it from a buy side, well, what if I could just sort of prompt a bunch of different systems and say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. What can you do for me? And that prompting, it really feels like a different way of interacting with media companies or publishers. And that's the part for me of agents is, well, that becomes a dialogue. I say to your agent, what do you got? I'm a local business. I'm advertising, Italian lessons for kids. You're like, well, actually, we have an Italian channel. No. I don't want an Italian channel. I want people who want to learn Italian, not people who speak Italian. You're like, oh, gotcha. Well, we do have, and that back and forth, maybe a great ad agency person could do, but you definitely aren't doing that with 1,000 different publishers. And think about all the ways that influencers and creators are coming up and all the different surfaces that are out there. I mean, there's so many ways that you could go find those people. And there's an aggregation bias today where agencies spend most of their money on Meta and a few other platforms because you can master those platforms and because you get scale. And if you're getting paid by the hour, it's one thing. But if you're supposed to hit a certain relatively small expense ratio, it's so much work to do these things. Why not get a big, massive spend on Meta versus doing almost the same amount of work for like 50 different platforms? And that's why the internet is so biased toward the largest platforms. It's a tyranny of scale. And so my belief is that agents will make us able to go out and do that much more efficiently, and actually break down some of the advantages that the large platforms have.
Yeah, you made some really good points there. I've written down a few things. I think agents could be kind of like a personal shopper, and it could tailor content for people, right? I've written down the word disintermediated because I had a conversation with somebody a couple of months ago, and I said, I think we're entering the disintermediated internet, where instead of me going to like hundreds of different sites, reading different content, I just go to a few different things, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, etc. One thing I would say though, I think it's a semantic era where if I ask a question, it's the intrinsic understanding, and your wife would like it, right? It's the underlying motivation for the question in hand to get to my answer. But I think there's an interpretability to agents, right? So let's say I ask an agent for that t-shirt I wanted. It then interprets my question, and my question is only as articulate as me. And then it thinks about it, and then it goes into the marketplace and looks around and thinks, oh, this is great for the context and the moment in time that it thinks. And then the supply side agent talks to that. And then it's like three different areas of interpretability from me, my mind and thinking, all the way through to serving an ad. So how do we make sure that there's a determinism in the way that adverts are served? I know it's probably quite a difficult question.
Well, I don't think determinism is necessarily a design goal. And if you think about how AI works, I mean, you can turn off randomization of AI. You can just turn the temperature to 0 and it will always give you the same output. But that's boring. And it doesn't leave room for spontaneity, for the, this incredible sort of ideation that happens. And so if you say, look, I want to buy auto ads, and there is a template that says, oh, for auto ads, do this, 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 and this, that's actually just programming. And you can do that algorithmically today. The challenge is that it's actually very hard. Like, it's actually hard to write those algorithms. Like, Smartly, I was talking to them, and they're like, yeah, we do APIs for all the platforms that matter. And I said, oh, like 100, like 200? They're like, 7. And I was like, basically, you're saying I can do anything I want as long as I use those 7 platforms. That's what you get when you are prescriptive about what you're trying to do. If you're willing to have a little bit of flexibility and maybe some slightly, inconsistent results, you get totally different outcomes. You could say, well, I'm going to try 1,000 things. Okay, fine. Some of them might not work, but think about the immense opportunity there, especially if you're running a pretty tight, sort of feedback loop where you're like, oh, wow, okay, ooh, that I didn't like, but like, can we do a lot more of these fun things? And honestly, as humans, like, we're good at this. Like, this is one thing about humans. We are really good at making mistakes. Like, we make great mistakes. Like, I think, like, look, I cook dinner sometimes, and I've made some terrible, terrible food, right? And I've made some amazing food. I don't always know which one I'm going to make, right? But there's something really beautiful about the fact that I'm sitting there in the kitchen, doing my damnedest to make my kids something they'll love. I have a teenager, so even if I do my hardest work and she hates it, like, there's always pasta. But I think that's okay, right? Like, at the end of the day, as a marketer, as long as 97% of my money is working, I bet that's twice as much as we get today. I bet there's a $200 or $300 billion opportunity for all those misconnections where agencies just don't have the resources to try things. If you could go experiment, I bet the advertising space would today be, instead of $1 trillion, I bet it would be between 1.2 and 1.5 trillion dollars. That's hundreds of billions of dollars just completely missing. And that probably influences 5 to 10 times that in terms of overall economic activity. If this works, we can make the entire global economy $1 trillion bigger. That's like bigger than aviation. I mean, we're talking about a massive opportunity for humanity to find products, services, companies, to fund content. Like, think about this, that we could change the way that you could go say, I'm going to fund this new media company I'm thinking of, because you don't have to fight for years to get to a scale that you could even take a meeting with someone at WPP. We'll just laugh at you today because you're just not even on the radar yet. That's not how agents are going to work if we're willing to let them try things. But if you want them to be perfectly predictable, you're going to get very little creativity and you're going to get very little value. And that's kind of the world we live in today. We live in a programmatic world. The word programmatic means there is a program. I believe we should live in the opposite of a programmatic world. I think we should live in a world that's full of expression and trial and error and experimentation and find serendipity, because that's how the human experience is most valuable. And that's what advertising really is. It's that spark, right? That just makes you fall in love with a brand. And if we can't take risks, we will never build extraordinary brands.
I think you chose the wrong career. I think you should have worked in sales. Because you're
You know
so good
what?
at selling.
Half the time I do. I'm like a sales guy who happens to write code, or maybe a coder who happens to sell stuff. I don't know.
It's hard to find those two skills together. That's very, very rare, like extremely rare. You mentioned the economics, actually. So obviously we're going to disintermediate things because we're going to get rid of DSPs. Okay. How does that change the economics of the industry, and how does it affect margin as well?
Well, DSPs and programmatic don't really matter to me. Like, it's almost like the decision to auction ads on web pages. It's just one way to do matching between buyers and sellers. And so if you look at the DSP and you say, well, one thing it could do, if the goal is to get your ads as many places as possible, well, auctions are one way, but there's nothing stopping you from saying, well, I'm going to do some auctions and some agentic buys and some direct buys and some PG. The strange thing to me is just the lack of convergence between the ad server and the DSP. If you think about it that way, it's like if you really compress those two things together, it's really how do I as a buyer have a way to see the entire landscape. I think that's kind of, if you think about Bill Wise and his vision for Media Ocean, I think he sort of sees this as, I want to be that unified platform for a marketer or an agency where they can kind of do all their advertising. And so the idea of, is that a DSP? Is that a demand side platform? Maybe, but even ad serving, like you're not going to ad serve probably into ChatGPT ads. You certainly don't in Amazon. You don't in most surfaces. Actually, you don't. I guess you can ad serve onto CTV, but I'm not even sure that's all that interesting or valuable at this moment. So it's a long way of saying I'm not interested in the nuances of individual technology platforms. I'm very interested in how do we create efficient matching between advertisers, publishers, and consumers. Like that virtuous triangle is where we find the most value. And if you're only interested in real-time auctions as your matching mechanism, you're already very limited to about 10% of all advertising. And if you tell me that goes away or changes, okay, I'm looking for the hundreds of billions of dollars of new opportunities. I don't think they're going to be real-time auctions. And that's the stuff that I think is hard for folks to understand. AI is not good at real-time. AI is not capable of responding in 10 milliseconds today, at least at any scale, and it's incredibly expensive. AI is amazing at figuring out over a period of time, to your example of going back and forth and sort of refining what you want. But I don't need to do that on every single impression. I can do that for a cohort or a segment, or I can do that for thousands of dollars of media at a time. I don't need to buy and bid on an impression. I will get impressions. They will look like what I want. But what idiot said we should bid on every ad? Like, who cares? Well, okay, fine. It was me, but like someone should have said, impressions aren't that valuable. There's a sustainability problem coming. It's going to be terrible for privacy. Like, why did nobody tell me? But that's the benefit of hindsight, is that we can see all the places where those ideas didn't really work at scale. I'm not saying they go away. I'm just saying that DSPs have to make a choice. And this is not just an ad tech thing. This is every company has to make a choice. Do you stick with what you're good at, or do you try to reimagine yourself for an agentic AI world, or do you hedge? And I think we see a lot of hedging right now, but the AI native companies who don't have to protect or imagine a legacy capability set are really advantaged in terms of connecting to today's AI use cases. And I think a lot of the legacy use cases are actually impediments to seeing the world through an agentic or an AI lens.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think you have to unlearn in order to learn the new ways of working, right? And in any industry, I was saying this to someone the other day, it's not always the innovative idea that wins. It's groups of people working together to move something. Because if you're really innovative and you're alone, you can't scale it very well. It's very difficult unless it's obviously your invention of the ad exchange. You mentioned a couple of good points. The point about being agentic and it thinking and doing things for you. I'll come on to another question in a second around new metrics. But the first thing I want to say is, have you seen the news around Amazon looking to sue Perplexity over the automated shopping and buying feature? Because it's agentically basically servicing Amazon information to users.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I mean, we've seen this with news for a while, where news companies were suing Google for scraping news off their websites, right? And, for Amazon, they don't want to lose their position as everyone's shopping homepage. Like they're the homepage for e-commerce for a lot of people. And I think in the very short term, they can stop perplexity for sure, but they can't stop their merchants from listing on ChatGPT. And so, in a way, stopping perplexity, which doesn't have very many users, is fighting the wrong battle. You know, it's like you've got an existential threat that's coming. It's going to completely change the world. It's a lot easier to go after a pipsqueak like perplexity than acknowledge and accept and confront a fundamental transformation that you can't stop. And if that makes you think of, Trade Desk attacking publishers and pre-bid for transaction IDs in the middle of a transformation that is so much bigger, it's the same mindset, which is, okay, I don't know what to do about the big problem, but I can go, poke on something that's like small and manageable where I know I can win. And that's a fundamental bias, right? Like that's a deeply human bias is, the flood's coming. So, I don't know what to do about that, right? What I can definitely do the dishes, right? It's a tractable problem, but deeply irrelevant to what's coming.
Yeah, I remember you said that people were laughing at you about vibe coding. I was telling people in 2022, 2023 about my fascination with AI, and I didn't really receive the best responses a lot of the time, but now it's like, oh, it kind of made sense. So you mentioned impressions, bidding on impressions. I don't know who invented that, but must have been a great idea at the time. What do you think should be the new buying models and buying metrics? Or maybe you're working on that in the background and you can't mention it, but if you did recommend something, what would it be?
Well, I mean, the thing with buying models is it's going to be very dependent upon different publishers, right? I mean, if you said, I want to sell, mentions in ChatGPT, great. I don't know how to track that per se, right? If you want to sell incremental basket size, if you're a retail media network, I mean, fantastic. But I'll tell you this, there's a lot of ways to price things that have nothing to do with impressions, and in fact, can't be transacted on impressions.
And
for instance,
so,
have you heard of clicks? This is a crazy thing, right? People used to click on stuff. Like you'd go to, it's called a search engine, right? I know it's a sort of silly idea these days, but you'd go to, there's this company called Google, and you'd go there and you'd type in keywords. Like you couldn't type in what you wanted. It couldn't handle that. You had to break it down into keywords and guess what it knew about, right? And then it would use those keywords and find all these articles on the internet, and then you'd actually touch a little underlined piece of text with your mouse. That's called a click. And then they would get paid by the site for you clicking on the link. Can you imagine? Like they wouldn't even tell you what you wanted to know. They'd make you click on something and go there, and they got paid for it. They got paid for not answering your question. Is that crazy?
that is crazy, and it's crazy because it's down to who's best at figuring out how to surface their results, and it's retrieval based, right? Now we're moving it. Well, it was retrieval, then it was generative, now it's RAG. We're double checking our answers, retrieving the information, and just double checking, hey, is this the right thing to give back? And so it's kind of in between now, isn't it? It's still generative, but it's retrieval augmented.
Right. But my only point being, you're not going to sell this on an impression basis. It doesn't make any sense. And so we've got to have Adtech models or advertising models that can do a lot more than that. And I don't know what the winning one will be for each surface. It will probably be impressions in some cases, right? But it needs to be flexible.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to say. There's different ways to go around it, right? Because people are now conversing with the internet, and Microsoft obviously shut down Xandr, which you sold to them, and it was an amazing platform. And now they're looking to do conversational advertising. How do you see this being articulated in these big tech firms?
Like the broad sort of agentic context or sort of the evolution of advertising?
Yeah, both. So, like, I think both kind of go in hand in hand, because a consumer can ask an agent, "Hey, I'm giving you a question," and it returns the ads for them.
I think if you ask Microsoft, they'd say that is the $1 trillion question, right? Is how do we put ads in there? Um, I think the question of like, will we use agents to buy ads versus having people clicking on things is less interesting to them because it's a smaller business, right? Not only is it not about $1 trillion, it's also you get a tiny little slice of that. And so if you're Microsoft, you're like, okay, I can make a few $1 billion for a lot of work, but it's just small potatoes, right? Um, I think if they look at the AppNexus tech they bought, it's amazing tech, but it's tech that was built for the programmatic market that we've acknowledged is changing very quickly. I don't know. Like, why does Microsoft need to be in that business? Now, you could say, why did they buy it? And that was, I think, a very poor set of internal decisions made, by a previous administration. Um, but I understand why they don't want to run it that way anymore. Like, that's a legacy business. And even watching Trade Desk, I mean, Amazon's giving away the tech stack, and Amazon has like incredible publishing assets. Like, you can, advertise on Prime Video, you can advertise on Twitch, you can advertise on Amazon. Like, if you just said, okay, like, if Amazon made no money on everything else but could monetize that very effectively, it looks a lot like Google, right? Google has search and YouTube, full stop. They had Gemini ads. Like, I just don't see how an independent who doesn't have access to those things has any chance of competing. And you have companies like Walmart who are like, yeah, this is great, but like, I want to capture full value. Agents make all of that easy. Like, if I'm Walmart, I'm going to have a sales agent and I'm going to just sell my own stuff to buyer agents. I don't want to pay a tech tax. So
That's a really good
you
point.
think about big companies. I mean, big companies are like, whoa, we've been stuck in a paradigm that doesn't fit our assets or our business needs. Let's go to the new paradigm. And the number of people building agents on top of the AdCP protocol, which is 3 weeks old, is absolutely insane. Like, if you told me 4 weeks ago that we would have hundreds of people collaborating in a Slack group about how to evolve this protocol, and that you'd have people actively talking about how it is going to be a fundamental disruption of this ecosystem, such that the largest companies are already building to it, I would have just laughed at you. Whereas in practice, I'm like, we've got to get a bigger boat. Like, we need to actually build the infrastructure for this, at a level that, took programmatic a decade. We're going to do it in 6 months. We're going to have most of the infrastructure that programmatic had, like, now, because we know what it looks like. We don't have to wait. We don't have to experiment. We're just like, okay, here's a list of things that a mature ecosystem has to have. Let's go raise the money to get them. Let's start working groups. Let's make it happen. I think for big companies, and we've got some really exciting conversations with massive companies who aren't even players in the ad tech space right now, who are like, yeah, this is an ecosystem that makes sense to us. And that's incredibly exciting.
Wow. Is in 6 months is quite an ambitious target. What made you what sort of inspiration did you have for doing this, and what was your aha moment for making a context protocol?
I mean, my aha moment was just the idea of a prompt describing what an advertiser is trying to do, and recognizing that, no amount of, I don't know, like JSON objects, or, trying to precisely describe, 2-letter country codes versus 3-letter country, like this whole idea of like trying to perfectly describe all these protocols. And how many bazillion meetings have happened to decide what are the 4 codes to describe a piece of content? Is it in stream? Is it outstream? Is it kind of in stream, or is it kind of outstream? That was like 50 meetings to come up with that. And it still doesn't even work. And then there's this huge uproar, like, you said it was number 2, but it was actually number 3. Really? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have my AI agent browse your website and decide if it likes the way your ads are put on the page. And if it doesn't, it's not going to buy them. You can put whatever number you want on that, but I'm going to give it a $0. And, of course that's how it should work. But that's not how people built protocols because we didn't have that capacity. So that to me is the aha moment, is so many of the things that were hard problems aren't anymore. If you say you want a 2-letter country code, my AI is like, all right. If you want 3 letters, okay. If you want the full name in Japanese, fine. I speak Japanese, I can even say American, Amerikanjin desu. There you go. I'm an AI.
You speak Japanese properly?
No, I can say like one sentence, but
okay, fair enough.
It's a joke sentence. Watashi wa Amerikanjin desu, which I'm saying wrong. But basically, it's like I am American, which I thought was funny since I'm a 6'5" white guy walking around Tokyo. I should know. I could just state something that they probably couldn't have figured out for themselves.
Makes sense.
I really Japanese is all I have.
It's okay. I don't know any Japanese, so you know a lot more than me. Obviously, this is the AI Lyceum, and it's around. It's got a philosophical angle to it. What does ethics mean to you, and how does it apply to AI and advertising?
Ethics means a lot of things, but I think at a very high level, it means thinking about the greater good in the decisions you make, rather than looking at them through a selfish personal lens. And it means potentially compromising or sacrificing to ensure that others are given a positive outcome or benefit from something. I think that's different than morality. I'm not trying to be like utilitarianism. I'm not saying we should do what's greatest good for all the greatest number of people, because that's not almost too like complicated. I'm just saying thinking about the impact of our decisions on other people. And so an ethical stance to AI would be, is the way that my system works actually producing benefit? And we can debate that forever because there's no single version of that. But I think broadly it's being a humanist. It's being thoughtful about, even if I can, it doesn't mean I should. That's ethics to me in a very simple nutshell. And the amount of time that we spend at Scope3 having exactly this conversation would be shocking to many people, since we're a small startup, but we have ambitions of doing something massive. And we think that comes with an immense amount of responsibility to do it well. And being massive and big doesn't matter if it doesn't have inherent deep purpose and a commitment to try to make the world a better place, even if we do make money and even if it is, just advertising. It doesn't mean we can't have an immense amount of positive impact, or at least try really, really hard to.
Yeah, I like your quote about just because we could doesn't mean we should. One last question to you. You have to ask a question to the audience listening. They have to answer in YouTube comments or think about it. What question would you like to ask everyone? It could be any question you want to ask.
My question is, there's one thing that you would hope that AI would not do. What is the line that AI would not cross in our lifetimes? What would it be?
That is a huge question. And it could be in robotic form, or it could be in a virtual form, right? I think it'll be in robotic form in the next 10, 15 years, and we'll be living with robots in the next, probably by 2050. It'll be an extremely good lifetime to experience technological shift. Maybe a bit scary, but I know that you've got to go, so I just want to say thanks for your time. And it's been I've seen you in a whole new light now, because a lot of the stuff I see about you is all tech, but I feel like we've covered you as a person, your journey, you as a husband, you as a dad, and also you as a leader and innovator, all in an hour, which is quite good. I think it's quite an accomplishment.